Today we'll be installing the belts, the tool head, and all of the wiring. Hi, so this is part 2 of building a Rook from start to finish. Today's video will be all the belts, the tool head, and all of the wiring. That's better. Now before we get started today, I just want to give a big thank you to LDO Motors for making this kit and also for sending it to me to make this video and to give it to you. And big thank you to Polymaker for sending me the filament to build the Rook. They have amazing filaments, so if you haven't tried it, please do. This is Silk Magenta, my absolute favorite color at the moment. Just a quick reminder, if you haven't seen part 1, go ahead and do that first and then come back to me. Now, first thing that we need to do today is to put the pulleys onto the 3 motors that needs them. There's one on the bottom and one on each side on the top. The one on the bottom is quite simple. You just put it with the thick part in, so that the knobbed GT2 pulley part out, and you put that onto your motor. For the right one, it's the same, normal orientation. For the left one, it's upside down, so keep that in mind. Now, the belts. There's 3 belts on a Rook, 2 at the top for the X and Y axes, and 1 at the back for the Z axes. The X and Y axes belts are exactly the same length because they do the exact same path but mirrored. The Z belt is quite a bit shorter, and it's just one single loop, and it attaches to the bed. Now, I like to pre-cut my belts before I install them. There's plenty of belts in the LDO kit, so you don't have to worry about running out of any of the belts. So the X and Y belts, the top belts, I like to cut them at about 100 to 95 centimeters or 1000 to 950 millimeters. This will give you a little bit of extra to install them, and then you can trim them to final length after install. The Z belt I like to cut between 50 and 60 centimeters or 500 to 600 millimeters. Again, this ensures that I have plenty of belts left over and that I can trim down at the end. Just to show you how much belt you'll have left over if you have the LDO kit, there's about 160 centimeters or 1600 millimeters of belt left over after I've installed my belts and trimmed them to size, and including that little piece that I used for my bearings in the beginning. So other than the belts, you are going to need a couple of things. There is, of course, the belt cradle. This is what attaches the belt to your top X-axis gantry. And then there's an option. You could either go with zip ties, or there's these really cool clips that is designed by Kyle. You can find these over at Printables, and I'll leave a link in the description if you want to pick these up. I will be doing both on this printer just to show you how to install both of these. My little tip is that if you have a tweezer or some really thin pliers, they can really help at this stage. Now, before installing the belts, I wanted to show you how we attach them to the printer. It's quite easy. When these GT2 belts are looped onto themselves and apply pressure, they grip onto the teeth, so they stay there. And that's the simple principle that we're using. So we can use either this belt clip or some zip ties and hold it together like that. To install the Z belts, we are going to use these little posts that are in the bed frame. And what we're going to do is we're going to loop the belt in and back out the same side and then attach it. So it'll be like this. Now to do that, it's quite simple. I usually grab my belt and I pull it through on an angle at about a 45-degree angle. And then I'll grab it from the bottom and then push it straight up. And now we have our loop. So for this one, I'll be using zip ties. So I'll be giving myself a nice short little piece to give me the most amount of belt on the other side. And then I'll attach my zip tie like that. So after attaching it on the first side, I'm going to bring the belt up and over the top idler. And remember to not twist the belt. You cannot twist that belt at all. And then back down through that big hole in the bed gantry. And then through this hole right above the Z motor, around the pulley, and make sure that your motor is nice and loose so that we can pull it all the way up to get the most amount of tension. So around the motor, back up through the same hole, and now we can repeat the process that we did on the top side of the bed gantry on the bottom side of the bed gantry. So push it through at an angle and go back straight down. Now if you've done everything correctly, you'll have a loop attached to the top of the bed gantry, up around this top bearing, back down through the bed gantry, around this pulley, and then back up to the bed gantry. Final step would be to trim your zip ties to make it really nice and neat. Now if you have a super long belt, I recommend that you trim it so that it won't hit on the other side while going up and down. It'll cause some binding issues later on. Now, belt clips. These are designed by Kyle, and it's my favorite way of attaching belts to a Rook. These have a slightly different design on each side, so you can see that is a slightly bigger hole than this side. So what we want to do with our belt is we want to put it into the small side and then around the belt cradle, back around on itself, and then we want to push that belt clip in. So that beveled edge, or sorry, chamfered edge on the front will help us to install it. So just note that the belts on a Rook are installed with the teeth out, just like this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put on the other one, and then we'll install it onto the printer. Now that I have my belt installed on one side of the belt cradle, I'll put this onto the printer. Just quick note, I'm using 2 of these just for safety. It's just my preference. Now I like to do is I like to get one of the long bolts that I have left in my kit and just put one of them on. This will just make it so that the belts won't flap around, and it'll just give me a solid point for these to hang on to. So I'll be installing the bottom belt first, and just a reminder, avoid twisting the belt. It won't work. So what I'll do is I'll go straight through this Y gantry. And I'll make sure that my belts are not twisted. And then I'll keep going around the front idler towers. And again, I'll look that my belts are not twisted in any way. Then I'll go back onto the motor and in through the slot in the back of the gantry. There's a small slot. And I'll put on my belt clips. So I'll put on 2. Again, this is just my preference to be extra safe. And then I'll go through the belt cradle. Now I can clip on just one of the belt clips just to keep it there temporarily. Next I'll do the top belt, and it's exactly the same, just the opposite order. So we'll go back towards the motor first. Around the motor, through our idler towers, And make sure that your belts are not twisted. Then go in to the side of the gantry through your belt clips. And then finally through the belt cradle. Now we'll have a final look and make sure that our belts are going straight through the bearings and not crossing each other, not twisting. We'll take off the temporary bolt that we inserted. And now we'll start tensioning the belts. So I'll just start with the top belt because the lower belt is already in the belt clip, but I'll take it out later. So I'll tighten that belt as much as I can. And then I'll get the belt clip on, just barely. So next I'll tighten the bottom belt, and again I'll put the belt clip on. At this point, the main reason why we are doing this is to get our pre-tension. This just ensures that we have enough adjustability on the motor mounts at the back to tighten our belts. So I'm happy with this amount of movement on the belts. We can fix that with our motor mount. So I'll slide this belt cradle on. And then our second one. And our belts are installed. Now we can go ahead and trim these. You can do that later. It should not make much of a difference as long as they don't hit the bearings. Finally, to finish the belt install, we are going to attach the belt cradle to the X carriage. And that's done with 4 M3x6 bolts. Now that our belts are installed and attached to the carriage, we should be able to get even movement. And if you twist one of the motors, the carriage should move diagonally. The final step for our belts is to attach these pulleys. Now the simplest way to do this is to make sure that one of the screws are on one of the flat spots. So the motors have what's called a D shaft. And if you want to do this, the easiest way for you is to tension one of the screws and then turn the motor until you can see that flat spot of the motor in the back. Then we'll loosen that screw once more. Now we'll move our gantry back as far as it goes. To get everything in the right place, there is a D shaft on the motors, meaning one side is ground flat. Ideally, we want to get one of the 2 tension screws on the pulley to be on that flat spot. Most of the time, the pulleys can just be twisted and the motor will stay in place. In my case, it doesn't. So I'll just grab some pliers, hold the shaft, and then twist the pulley until I get it into the position that I want. In general, these should be flush on this side, but to make sure, pull your carriage all the way back and look at these 2 belts. They should be completely parallel. They don't have to be extremely precise. You don't have to measure. I just have a look from the side and try to make them as parallel as I can. That looks about right. And then I'll tighten the pulley screws. Remember, there's 2 of them. Now repeat that on the other side and at the bottom. On the Z motor, the only thing that you need to check is that the belt doesn't hit the sides of the gantry. And then once you have that in position, you go ahead and you tighten your pulley. Now we'll start working on our tool head. The first thing that we need to do is install some heat sets. In total, there are 7 heat sets. There are 2 on the back of the rookery, And then there are 5 in what we like to call the key. So this key is what holds your hot end to the carriage and holds the rookery to it. So to install this, we need to use a soldering iron. Any soldering iron will do. They all get hot enough to do this. I'm going to use my slightly fancy soldering iron heatset setup, but any soldering iron will do, and I'll show you how to do this. So in this rookery key, there are 2 different types of heatsets. There's the normal, what we consider the standard size of M3 by 4 by 5. They are 5 millimeters in diameter and 4 millimeter long, and they are M3. The second type is M3 by 8 by 5, and these are 8 millimeters long, 5 millimeters in diameter, and M3. So our first heatset is going in this bottom hole right here. Now to get a heatset in, all you need to do is heat it up and push it in. Ideally you want something flat to make sure that it's straight in the end. So what I'll do is I'll just put my hot soldering iron onto it, push it in, and then I'll use this is my square, and that locks it in and also starts the cooling process and makes sure that it's straight. I'll do the same for the top 2 holes. The last 2 heat sets, the 8 millimeter long heat sets, are a little bit more tricky. You need an edge to hold them on, so you could do this on the edge of your work table or anything you can find really. I have my trusty little anvil that I use for this, and these are going to stick out when you're done installing them. So what I do is I'll just push them in, and then I'll do the other. So get them all the way in, and then I'll get my square. Because this is made of metal and it's flat, it's a nice way for me to make sure that I have a good seated install at the right depth. And there we have our key ready to be installed on the printer. The final 2 heat sets are on the rookery tool head, and they are on the back. Installing these are exactly the same as on the little key. The next step is to prepare our hot end, and you'll take the piece that has the nozzle and the heat break. The TCHC has this as an all-in-one, and you'll put it into the heatsink, and then you'll use this bolt at the front to tension it and hold it in place. I recommend that you install it in such a way that the wires go out at a 45-degree towards the back. This will help us route the wires later. Now I'll put the little silicone sock on, and this one is ready to be installed. To install the hot end to the key, we're going to need 2 M3 by 16s, and these go straight into those long heat sets that we just put in. Don't tighten these all the way in the beginning. Just get them all the way in, and then have a look at your tool head, and you can probably see that I can wiggle it. So try to make this as straight as possible. This will help with your print quality in the end. And there we go, our hot end is installed. Now we'll start installing all of our fans. first fan is this 3010, and it goes on the inside of the rookery, preferably with this cable up towards the top of the rookery. Now I'll use some M3 by 16 and some nuts on the back. That is our 3010 installed with the nuts on the back. Next we'll install the two 4010s. So to install the 4010 fans, I'll grab the wire and pull them through one of those holes. And I'll do the same with the other one. Just make sure that the wires will go in through the top and then out these holes. To put the fans into the rookery, it's almost a little bit too easy. I like to unclip them from this clip at the back here, and make sure you have the opening for the fan in the bottom, and simply slide them in. Now there's a small channel in the back here for the cable, so get the cable aligned and then slide it in. And I'll do the same with the other one. You might notice that they're a little bit loose, and this will cause your rookery tool head to make a clunking noise when it's printing. So what I've been doing since day one, since we started testing the rookery, is I've just grabbed a piece of zip tie, the end on an off cut of the zip tie, and I will just push it in down into here and trim off the excess. I'll do the same on the other side and trim off the excess. And that's enough to make it so that there's no rattling on my tool head at all. Next we'll start doing the exciting stuff, installing the hot end and our rookery to our belt cradle. And this is a genius designed by Gulsifer. What we're going to do is we're going to put a M3 by 10 through this bottom hole in the rookery belt cradle into this heat set on the back of our key. What I like to do is I like to get the screw just in and started first. So at this point it's on there, but it's a little bit loose. So what I'll do is I'll push down with my thumb right here at the top, and then I'll secure that screw. I'll give it a nice little tighten, and our hot end key is installed. Here's a good opportunity for us to install our Bowden tube for our filament. What I like to do is pull this little blue clip off and lose it. Then I'll put my Bowden tube all the way in, and I'll put my little blue clip back while holding the filament tube, the Bowden tube, in. So I'm pushing the tube in and then installing that little blue clip at the same time. Next is installing the rookery tool head, and on the back of the tool head we are going to use these two holes to attach to these 2 points on our key. To install the rookery onto the printer, we are going to put the hot end wires inside of the rookery and then gently push the rookery onto our key and install it using M3 by 6. Now that is our tool head installed. So the final thing that we need to do before installing all the wires is to put on our extruder. Now let's look at the extruder assembly. So we have our motor, our pulley, our mount, and then our BMG with all of its parts. So let's just start with the motor, and we're going to put this pulley on here. And like before, this is a D shaft, so line up this little tightening screw right there. And I like to put this at about 3 to 3.5 millimeters, just right about there. And he wanted to go away, okay. And so let's put that away. Let's put the mount away and then focus on the BMG. Now the BMG has two main bodies: the tensioning arm, a guide, the tensioning screw, and then the actual gear that does all the pushing. So how this goes together is quite simple actually. The gear goes into this hole right there. I'm just going to turn this around, it'll be easier for you to see. Next, the little guide goes in right under there. Then our arm goes in like that. And then finally this gets put together. So just make sure that the pin for the arm goes into the right hole right there. And we can probably pull this piece of PTFE tubing out for now. And that is our BMG put together. And I want to just hold on on this one. It does go into this hole right there, but just don't put it in yet. So I'll put in the 3 screws that will hold this to the motor. Now this goes together with the motor like this, but we can't reach the screws for this mount. So we'll need to put the mount onto the printer, and then we'll put this onto that mount. So I'll be right back with the printer. Now the mount for the BMG, it can be attached to any one of these holes on the side and on the back. I prefer mine on the back, just cleans up the look. Now what I'm going to do is I'll take the mount and I'll use a M3 by 10 screw. And I'll put mine here. And then I'll follow up with another M3 by 10. Next, I'll grab the motor and the BMG, and with the plug for the motor facing straight down, I'll put that into that hole, put the BMG on right there, and then I'll start tightening this screw down here. Now as soon as I can find it through on the motor down there, I need to line that up and don't tension that. So make it so that you can still adjust your BMG to find the other screws. So we're kind of working blindly here, looking for that hole in the motor. So if you wiggle stuff around, you'll get there in the end, and it's in. So finally I'll tension that one, the last bolt, and our BMG is in. Now one important thing to note here is that we want to make sure that the big gear up here is interlocked properly with the motor gear right in there. So you should have smooth motion without any resistance. Now if you have that, you can go ahead and put the tensioning bolt in. Now don't worry about how much tension you put on this, we're gonna look at that later. And one final thing, let's put in the Bowden tube from our tool head. And I like to cut this down. The amount depends on where you mount your BMG. But you want this to be as short as possible, but still having a nice arc at full range. And also, let's not forget the little piece that goes in the bottom of the BMG. Now that's the mechanical part of this build complete. There's only one more piece that we need to actually use a screwdriver to put on, and that is our little skirt in the back to hold our DC input. But I'm going to do that while I'll do the rest of the wiring. It's just easier that way. So next up, wiring. Okay, wiring. This is, for some people, the most scary part. For some other people, it's the most exciting part. For me, this is my favorite part about building printers. All the wires have to go somewhere, and I need to find out where. So the thought that I had was I'll just do one wire at a time. So one plug. I'll film every single plug that I plug in, and I'll put annotations down in the corner as to what this is and the pins that it's going to. As long as you follow this exact guide, the config file that I'll be making for Clipper later will just work. Hopefully. Now let's just start at the top and move our way down. I'll be connecting everything, and then we'll be going over and covering everything and make it look neat afterwards. So first things first, you're going to grab the power wire for your heater that you plugged into your Manta M4P at the beginning, and you're just going to plug that into the black wire here. So that's your hot end already plugged in. Next, we'll take the thermistor wire. This is a loose white wire that comes in the kit with the hot end, and plug that in. And that is our entire hot end all wired. Now I'm going to put in a small little bracket right here on the rookery, and that's a strain relief for your wires. This is also a spot where you can attach a ADXL input shaping tool, or you can have one that attaches to your hot end. So grab your little strain relief piece and just and put it into these two holes with M3x6. And that's our strain relief in. We'll put on the fancy sleeving and put in a zip tie here later. Next is the bed. Now I'll just be taking all of the tool head wires and just pull them aside for now so that we can work on our bed. So on the bed there's two sets of wires. There's the heater wire and the thermistor wire. I like to put them next to each other over here so that when we put them in a sleeving, they'll come in out at the same spot. Now the thermistor, just put that down to the bottom. The heater wire you already plugged into your motherboard, so that's this plug with the red and black wires, and that goes in like that. Now let's take all of our tool head wires and put them back, and let's keep it neatly like that. Next, we'll prepare our rear skirt to put our DC plug in, and this hole I've intentionally made slightly too small so that you'll get a really nice snug fit. Now the way you would adjust this hole to fit your DC plug is that you'll test it, and it should be tight, so that's okay. You could screw this in. That it's a valid way to do it. You could also cheat a little bit, grab a pair of side cutters that we all have, and start reaming, and just do that on both sides a couple of times, and you'll open up that hole quite quickly. So now I've made sure that this fits, so I can put that in, and I can push it all the way through, And I'll take the washer and the nut that comes on there and screw that on. This doesn't need to be super tight. I gave it just a little bit of oomph like that, and it's on. That's nice and secure. Now this is the point where you can put your skirt on and screw it in with some M3x10s. I'm choosing not to do this until we get to the stage where we are going to put on the sleeving at the end. So hold on with the skirt for now. Next, we're going to plug in all of the motor wires for the A and B motors and the extruder. So in the kit, there's these little tiny yellow clips that helps you note where your motors are. So put them onto the wires. There's one that's different from everything else. It's this super short one. That is the Z motor. All of the other ones are the same length. So with all of our motor wires for the AB and extruder, we have that little clip on the end where it goes into the motherboard. That's the small plug. And then there's the wider plug that goes into the motor. Let's start with the easy one. This is the extruder wire. Next is our A motor, which is this one. And finally, our B motor, which is this one. Now let's go underneath and start plugging things in. Okay, let's look at wiring the Manta M4P. To start off with, we're just going to install the stepper drivers. These come separate from the motherboard, and you'll need to do some pinning and put on the heatsinks. So after putting on the heatsinks, we'll install this single little bridge right there on all of our drivers, and this one on these two motors. Now we'll plug in all of our stepper drivers into the board, making sure that the side that has the extra two pins goes into those extra two slots. Next, we'll grab the tiny little motor that came with the kit, and we'll plug into our Z motor right here. And let's start plugging things in. First up is the motors. So we're going to start with the tiny Z motor. Next, we will find the A motor. Then the B motor, and finally, of course, the extruder motor. Then we're going to look for the wire for the 3010 fan. Now there's 3 wires coming for fans on the tool head, but they are different. The ones with the small little label on them with PCF, that's for part cooling fan, they also have a different plug, so they won't actually plug into the motherboard. So first up is the one that has the 3010 cooling. That goes into this plug right here. Next in the kit, there's a tiny piece of wire and a 3-plug PCB. We're going to plug one of the sides of this little wire into that PCB, and then the 2 fan wires for the cooling fans goes into that same PCB, and now we'll plug that into the next fan port right there. Then we'll get the thermistor wire that is for the hot end. That's the one with the black plug. And we'll plug that in right here. Then we'll find the white thermistor wire with the white plug. It's also labeled with bed. And we'll plug that in right there. Now let's grab the Z end stop and plug that in all the way over there. It's barely enough, but it's enough. And that's all the wires connected. That's it. This is a really simple wiring install. Next, we'll do some neating up and cleaning up of the wires and make it look better, and install that rear panel for the DC plug. And I'll come back to you. And there we have it. All built, all wired, neatly. It's a good little package. It's a super lightweight little build. And I'll do some shots to show you all of the angles. The most important part about wire management is just keeping things together, and by using the sleeves that comes in the LDO kit, it's super easy. So what I've done is I took all of the wires from the tool head, collected them in one single sleeve. Then I attached that sleeve right here with a zip tie to the frame, and then I put a little notch into the wire sleeving, and then pulled all the motor wires into that notch, put another cable tie to stop it from falling out again, and then just straight down and into the skirt. On the bed, I put a zip tie just around the bed frame to hold the cables for the bed in place, and then made sure that there was enough length to go into the skirt, and then put the skirt back in with 2 M3 by 10. Underneath, it's mostly just a matter of collecting everything and putting some zip ties around. There's plenty of zip ties in the kit to make sure that you can keep all your wires neatly into the frame. You could put some zip ties on the end of the sleeves, but I don't see a reason why. Okay, that's it for part 2 of the LDO Rook build series, and I think it's going really great. I hope you're following along. If you cannot or you have questions, leave them in the comments below, or hit me up on the Roll-On Discord in the Rook channel. Next video will be all about Clipper and all the tuning that you need to do on the Rook. Hopefully it should be quite plug and play after you've flashed and installed Clipper. So if you did like this video, please hit that thumbs up button. If you didn't like it, hit the thumbs down. It does help me evaluate my content. And if you haven't subscribed, please do so. It really helps me out. There's a bunch of links in the description to me and my stuff and LDO and Polymaker. So make sure that you go there and have a look. See ya!